By the end of the novel, the reader should know your character better than they know their best friend, their spouse, even possibly themselves. Why? Because readers have access to a character's innermost thoughts. Some argue that that is the hallmark of a novel. In real life, we don't have that.
Hi, guys. It's great to see you all. I asked Adam to come in today and talk about characters. So, Adam, take it away.
Thank you, Celeste. So Celeste is going to talk about character for the next few sessions of this writing group, and we thought we'd kick it off with a little background. But before I do my little talk, I'd like to go around and do our traditional Bardsy welcome, have each of you say where you are geographically, and then recommend a story for the group on this almost New Year's Eve. So Pam, why don't you go first?
Sure. I'm Pam. I'm coming to you from Sarasota. And I just finished a pretty cool book on a cruise called Before Dorothy. And it's the story of Annie M., the fictional character, and a look at how Annie M. got Dorothy. And the story takes place during the Dust Bowl, which is fascinating to me. So it was a great story. I think it was fun to see the characters that we all recognize from The Wizard of Oz, and yet get a different perspective on one of the support characters. So it was a good story.
Good. Excellent. And you had fun on your cruise. Stacey?
Hi, I'm Stacey Campbell. I am in Greeley, Colorado, which is just a little bit north of Denver. And one of my recent favorite recommendations, it's any book by Taylor Adams. He's written a string of thrillers. He's getting ready to come out with one in February, but one of his latest ones is called The Last Word. And it literally has twists all along until probably the second to last page. And it was an incredibly satisfying read. And it was very infuriating as well, because he does that so well.
Infuriating, but inspirational.
Yes.
Excellent, yes. Stacey. Alex?
Hi, I'm Alex Vuileumier. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and I think, Adam, you'll be happy to know I'm reading Dune, first time.
Yay, love Dune. Not a worse book, not a better book you can read, in my opinion, when it comes to other worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And Melany.
Hi, Melany Nitzsche from St. Louis. I am knee-deep into the Overstory right now by Richard Powers. Really interesting book that features a cluster of stories, but the main character in most of them are trees. Very interesting.
Very nice.
Interesting book.
Good. So that actually feeds directly into today's topic. If a tree can be a character, ... We'll leave that for some thought. So, dive right in. The title of our talk today is... Y'all see this okay? Publishable Characters in 10 minutes. So I promised Celeste I would talk for less than 15 minutes. I'll talk for 10, and then we can leave some time for questions if you have any. This is all taken from the character guide we just published. It's not being marketed yet, so you guys get a chance to see the earliest version. It's the result of about a year, maybe 3 years worth of work. And it essentially encapsulates our Bardsy theory. And the reason why is characters are essential to your novel's value, right? We have our value triangle, our 3 elements that go into your book's sales proposition, and characters are probably the biggest part of that. And arguably the hallmark of a novel is the ability to see inside your character's mind, and then that gives way to empathy. And if you can create durable empathy between your reader and your character, that is going to be the key to selling books, more so than anything else. And the reason why we started our analysis with character was because that is the way you can get the most bang for your effort. Right? Reader satisfaction is closely linked with how well they identify and merge with your character. Right? So if you're going to spend an extra hour on your novel, this is probably the best way to spend it. And solving character problems first gives you a basis for everything else you're going to work on going forward. And then if your novel's having issues, right, refocusing your attention on that character, the main character, is going to be a way to juice up and energize your entire story. And there's a good argument to be made that character-driven novels are easier to write. And to put it another way, starting with your character, then moving to the other elements, world, conflict, theme, and plot, offers a lot of leverage that other elements don't. And I believe the reason why is because humans are social creatures, right? A huge chunk of our brain, as well as our time, is devoted to interacting with other people. And so when we're authors, we can take advantage of all that brain mechanism and all that experience we have with other people in order to construct characters that are meaningful to the reader by taking advantage of our own abilities when it comes to relating to other people and when it comes to thinking about other people, using those areas of our brain that are predisposed to doing that. So there's two requirements in our theory for publishable characters. The first is authenticity, and you guys have probably heard of this before. But authenticity is the idea that your characters are relatable as real people. Now, before you look askance at that, there is good scientific evidence to suggest that we think of fictional people in exactly the same way as we think of real people. So we think of real people by forming a little model of them in our brain. It's called a simulacrum. And then we use that model to both predict and smooth out and store our knowledge about them. So whenever we have interactions with another person, that simulacrum is always there functioning in the background, either taking in new information or predicting what they're likely to say, etc. And we relate to fictional beings in exactly the same way. We form an identical simulacrum for them. The only difference is that at some level, we realize they're fictional. But other than that, our brain treats them almost identically as if they were real. So that's criteria number one. Criteria number two is they're investable. And what that means is they're worth reading about. Right? And this is the one we want to focus in on. Why? Turns out number one is easy, right? It is extremely easy to get people to see something as a person. If you look over my shoulder here, you can see George hanging out at the back. Not a person, right? Just a bit of cloth and some stuffing. Sorry, George. But I can carry on a conversation with him, right? If I ask you to ask him a question, you can think of one. And then more importantly, you can also think of a response. How you doing, George? Great, right? Humans are so predisposed to anthropomorphizing things that you can turn a rock into a character, right? Or a tree, as Melany just said. It's just something humans do because we are, forgive the word, wired for social life. And that social life means seeing other people as people. And our net is so wide that we'll bring in almost anything. And that anything includes the fictional characters that you introduce to your readers. Now, on the other hand, number 2 is hard, right? Ask yourself, how often do you meet an interesting person in everyday life? And I would suggest that it's a rare occurrence. On the other hand, you need your main characters to be compelling, right? They have to attract the reader's attention and then hold on to that attention in order to make it worthwhile for the reader to put energy into getting to know them and following their arc, and ideally, necessarily, forming that kind of empathic bond with them. So, authentic, easy, right? You can spin up a simulacrum and think of anything as a real person almost in the blink of an eye. Investability is hard, and that's the one we're going to pay more attention to. Let me talk about 2 implications of this. The first thing is that we want to think about our character's identity. We want to establish that identity in our minds so that we can see them as a real person. If we see them as a real person, then they're going to emerge in our words as a real person for the reader. At the same time, we don't have to be concerned about backstory. So this is the opposite of what some writing guides and coaches teach. Write an extensive backstory. That way you'll get to know your character. That's not the way we want to do it, right? We want to think about who they are as a person. Once we have that solidified in our heads, then we can invent a tiny backstory that is relevant to that particular portion of the novel. Backstory represents a temptation. You add an infinite amount of details in the hope that the more details you add, the more real your character will become. But nothing could be farther from the truth. Your character is already real at the mere mention of their name and maybe 1 or 2 little details, salient features of their persona, right? Adding more details doesn't make them more authentic. In fact, it could make them less authentic. In the first place, you could add something inconsistent, and then that just destroys their authenticity immediately. In the second place, it can just be trivial, right? And the more trivia you add to some character, especially at the very beginning, the less likely they are to be investable. So in terms of identity, we want only the relevant details to be presented, and that means minimal backstory. That carries through to this second implication, which is you need to be very careful about making introductions. And then as you make an introduction, you have to manage their arc over the course of your story. So think about how you meet people in everyday life, right? It's usually somewhat spontaneous. If it's at a party, you may get 1 or 2 pieces of gossip before you're forced to say hi. And that's basically it. Right? You don't get a paragraph or worse, pages describing who they are as a person. You meet them, you form an impression based on a very tiny package of information. And that information can be absorbed in microseconds, right? And then you form that impression and you start to get to know them. And we want an analogous process for writing. Right? We want to think very carefully about that 1 or 2 little tidbits of information that is going to introduce your character to the reader and start the process of getting to know them. So what we don't want to do is a huge info dump with pages of backstory, description, and everything else, right? What we want to do is have this picture of an integrated being in our mind, a real person, be they tree, monkey, or rock, and then figure out that few sentences that is going to create the exact introduction that is needed at that point in your novel. Now, continuing on, you're going to have to carefully manage how the reader gets to know that character, right? They're getting to know them as a person, which means you're going to steadily supply more relevant information so that they can become more familiar with them over the course of the novel. The upshot is that by the end of the novel, the reader should know your character better than they know their best friend, their spouse, even possibly themselves. Why? Because readers have access to a character's innermost thoughts. And some argue that that is the hallmark of a novel. In real life, we don't have that. We can't read people's minds. So the magic of a novel comes from that almost telepathic ability. And by reading minds, you know that person extraordinarily well. The level of sort of knowledge and familiarity you have about a fictional being is unparalleled. And writers have to use that to their advantage. And the way to do that is to carefully feed out information through all these pathways to build a picture, to build that model of who the character is in the reader's mind. At the same time, you have to manage an arc. We're going to talk about that in just a second. So an arc then is, let's think about it as plotting, right? It is constructing the choices your character faces to, first of all, maximize empathy and then to bring about some kind of change in that character. So to define an arc simply, you have the character at time 1, the beginning of the novel, and then you have character at time 2, the end of the novel. And what we want is for the character to slowly change so that the reader experiences that growth over the course of the novel. And we do that through carefully constructed incremental steps. And each of those steps takes the form of a choice, right? A character is making a choice, and growth appears in the form of different choices. So the character at time 1 will choose different things than the new person they are at time 2. Now, a little bit of background is needed so that the reader can understand these choices, and we call that context, right? So these choices that the character is making throughout the novel have to be carefully contextualized so that the reader understands the situation. And if you do that properly, 2 things are going to happen. First of all, they're going to have empathy, right? I get why the character is choosing that. And second of all, they're going to be able to follow this growth and the arc that you are presenting to the reader. All right, topic next. How do you entice investment? What we're trying to do is create some kind of overlap or resonance between the character and your reader. And there's only 2 ways to do that. The first is some kind of overlap in identity, right? I often talk about my new favorite book is Dungeon Crawler Carl. The second favorite book I have is We Are Bob / We Are Legion. Those 2 books have one thing in common. What? Their main character is sort of an elderly, curmudgeonly male. I identify with that, right? I can see myself in the main character, and I'm happy to keep reading it. Now, you don't have to be that obvious. You can do some kind of more subtle manipulation with identity. We're looking for overlap. So it could be more abstract. For example, I'm a parent, right? I can identify with characters who are parents. Maybe Melany's tree has a little seedling that it's caring for. I don't know, I'm just making that up. You have to think about who your reader is, and then think about how your character can resonate with them through whatever attribute, whatever aspect of them that you can bring to the fore. Successful authors sort of bring as many aspects to their characters that they can so that the reader can form that kind of bond with them, a bond through mutuality. And then that's what stimulates interest. There's a second route to empathy, pardon me, there's a second route to enticing investment as well, and that's situational empathy, right? If we see a character undergoing a situation, having to make a choice that's similar to one we make, that's another good way to encourage investment. Now, the one I love is E.T., right? He's a puppet, arguably. He's certainly not attractive. He's kind of an alien. No identity overlap whatsoever, at least minimal. On the other hand, he's lost, right? He's far from home. He's trying to figure out a way to get back. That is something we can all relate to, right? By emphasizing his situation, it evokes a corresponding situation in us, and we can remember times that we're lost, right? Maybe as a child, maybe as an adult, right? That sense of situation is one that encourages us to see ourselves in the story and thereby draws investment. So anytime you can construct a situation, I'll say it in a more strong way, every time you construct a situation, think about how that's going to resonate with your reader. Try to bring them into that by using something they can relate to, some kind of pre-configured circumstance that they've actually been in themselves. Now, obviously, it can't perfectly match, right? If it's an alien, you don't expect these situations to be a one-to-one mapping, right? But you expect certain aspects of the situation to exactly parallel aspects of situations your reader has been in. All right, so I think that is my 10 minutes or so. The next step in this process is going to be Bardsy's free character developer. Celeste is going to explain how it works. It is available at this URL that I have at the bottom of the screen. This works, right? It instantiates the theory of character that I just began to describe. And then as an added benefit, you can, once you construct your character by entering all this information about them, selecting details using our character equation, it will collate them and print out a beautiful PDF that you can take. And I believe Celeste is going to be using it as an exercise fairly soon. All right, do we have any questions? Nothing?
I would encourage you to ask questions. Go ahead.
Stacey?
How would you succinctly define empathy?
Good question. Perfect empathy is a merger between two people, right? I love you. Two halves that make one whole. Your brains are totally in sync, right? So backing off of that, empathy is any kind of overlap that creates an understanding between you and someone else. In this case, between a reader and a fictional character. So when you have empathy, you are feeling the same things, you are thinking the same things, you are kind of pointed at doing the same things. The opposite is sympathy, right? I feel sorry for the character, or I pity the character, or I celebrate their victory, right? Sympathy is something a spectator does. Empathy, on the other hand, is something a participant does. So you want the reader to participate in your character's choices so that they can co-experience the same things your character is participating.
You used
Okay.
the word earlier of identify. I think that's the key here.
Yes. So empathy springs from a mutual identification.
Yeah, and the reason I'm wondering about this is right before this group started, I went to see Marty Supreme. Have you seen that yet?
No, not yet, but I've heard about it.
Yeah, and so it's Yeah, I would love for you to see the film and then get your thoughts on it, because the primary character is a disgusting character who ruins everybody around them. And you're not rooting for him, you're not on his side, any of that. And so, but the film is engaging all the way through, but I have no empathy for that character at all.
Good. So it's a great point to bring up. So I plan on seeing it either this weekend or next. Thank you, AMC A-List. I'll see it for free in some sense. Let me make a general comment first. Movies, by the nature of the medium, are not going to elicit the same kind of empathy as novels.
Sure.
Movies are designed to be spectated. Novels are designed to be relived in your imagination. So movies and empathy is a lot looser bond than the kind of empathy you'll get from reading a novel. With that said, I don't know if there's a lot more to say than that, right? I don't expect to have the same kind of empathy. In fact, let me put it another way. No one should expect having the same kind of empathy from watching a movie with a character as from reading a novel about a character. It's just an impossible bar to reach because you don't have that kind of access to their inner life. And anytime you'll notice that anytime movies try to introduce access to that inner life through a voiceover or some kind of monologue, it just doesn't work very well, right? Too much of it, it gets heavy-handed. Too little of it is not sufficient to reach the same level as empathy as a novel has the potential to. Good thought, Stacey.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So does it make sense to, once you have main characters more fleshed out, to look for chinks in their armor to then build in your secondary characters to fit into those chinks?
Ooh,
Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. That is a double question, Melanie. Good work. So I hear two questions. The first is about flaws, right? Is that correct? And then the second is about the difference between main characters and minor characters. Let me address the second one first because it's easier. You don't have to worry about minor characters, right? We're putting all of our effort into developing identities for main characters. Why? So they can attract the reader's attention and win empathy. A minor character you should be putting zero effort into. As you say, they exist only to bring out aspects of the main character, right? It's okay to have one-dimensional minor characters. So, the thing you have to be concerned about is sort of the valley between a minor character and a main character, right? So oftentimes you'll be writing and your minor character will be interesting, so you develop them more and more, and then they sort of start leaning into major characterhood. That's a problem because they're drawing the reader's attention, energy, and investment away from your main character. So you said it correctly. The way to think about this is minor characters are there to assist, right? Assist the characters, assist the readers getting to know that character and participating in their journey. The second part is about flaws. So you'll often hear this advice, make your character real by adding flaws. And it's just diametrically opposite of our theory, right? You can't add anything to a character. What you do is you try to build a holistic picture of who they are, and then that holistic picture is what you write from. So you can introduce an ingredient to them as part of who they are, and that ingredient may be a negative aspect, and then that's a flaw. But nevertheless, it's still part of who they are, right? It's not tacked on. So that's the worst thing, right? Oh, my character has some kind of Achilles heel. Maybe they have an eye patch, or they have a southern drawl, or some kind of limp, right? That doesn't make them more real. It's the equivalent of adding another detail to backstory. It's just another tacked on thing that may or may not be consistent with who they are. And it's certainly not going to grab the reader's attention because it's not integrated into their personhood, right? So you have to be very careful about these kinds of things and make sure that it's a whole person. Right? Getting back to Marty Supreme, doesn't have to be a likable person, right? Just has to be an authentic person, again, which is easy, who is interesting, right? And if you have an interesting person, that's enough, because then you can build empathy from there. Question? Copacetic? All right. I will turn it over to Celeste, so thank you very much. I would encourage you to use our free character developer. It's working well. We've tested it extensively, and I hope all the bugs are gone. But if you do find a bug, just email us at our tech support, and we will get it fixed. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Adam.
Bye, guys, and Happy New Year.
Thank
Thank
you, you
you.
too.
Bardsy delivers the tools, guidance, and support you need to produce compelling novels. Our well-researched and thoroughly tested approach includes our minimum complete story, a 90-second exercise that keeps your writing on track while fueling creativity. Bardsy Publishability Index, a 23-dimension checklist that offers attainable goals and provides actionable feedback. And our brand new comprehensive character developer that helps you construct unforgettable characters. Come see for yourself at Bardsy.com today. Try a workshop or enter our first chapter contest. Then, when you're ready, Elite Membership delivers writing groups, personal coaching, and a curated community. With Bardsy, your work will captivate everyone, from agents to publishers, and, most importantly, your readers.